very much, Professor Rockwell. And there are some questions in the chat, and I think it's a little bit maybe close to most of what you have already discussed. So the first question is asking, now that we have read about Tapo and his collections of two Voyant and his collections, as well as even the programming historian, which the link, but he's also asking, what are the basic tools to set up the lab itself, like to the physical lab,
Yeah.
and are licenses required? And then the second question is, how do I find the right team who share the same vision? Like someone else is asking, is asking, collaboration with people who share the same vision. So those are the two questions in the chat.
Yeah. So the right tools. So it'll depend partly on the project that you're doing. So, if you're an archaeology project, it's going to be a very different set of tools. But I'm going to assume that what we're talking about is people working with literary or linguistic materials. So typically you need a scanner if you have manuscripts of some sort or another. You need a scanner. You need OCR tools if they work in your language, and it's interesting how some of these general purpose AI tools are actually getting very good at OCR of handwriting. But I would recommend there are tools you have to pay for them, but like Transcribus is a tool. It's not open, but it is a sort of community maintained tool, and it uses machine learning. So if you're trying to do OCR in a language, you could sort of work to train a model that improves the OCR on the particular language that you're working. So OCR gets you from, if you will, paper or manuscript to the raw text. Then what you need is you want to proofread and enrich the text, and do not use Microsoft Word. So that's the first thing. You need to understand, and this is where it's really, in some ways, it's the tools are not expensive. It's the understanding. You need to understand how to create a sustainable, long-term scholarly electronic text. So it's got to be a text file. You've got to understand markup, XML markup. You want to invest the time to understand TEI. All of this is cheap. You can get a text editor for free on your computer, but you need to understand how to do XML. So it's the learning. And, you know, if anyone wants, I am happy to give a 1 hour lesson on XML or something like that. But you probably have people who know it in your community. You then typically have to develop. Let's say you're doing a whole mess of novels by a particular writer. You want to develop a document schema. It's like the protocols so that all those novels are marked up and enriched in the same way. You have to make decisions about, all sorts of decisions, and these are humanities decisions. What does this name refer to? Who is this person? If you're trying to create named entity linking and stuff like that. But there are some useful XML editing tools like Oxygen. So that one, it doesn't cost a lot. It's a good XML editing tool that gives you a lot of facilities, but you can do it just in a plain text editor. I use BB Edit. Um, so that's the enrichment. And this is where it's people, 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 because you need people who understand XML. Then if you want these texts to be readable on the web, you need somebody who understands cascading style sheets and helps you build those. And then, an XML file and cascading style sheets, you just put it on a web server. You don't need anything fancy. And then if you want to study these texts, you need some text analysis environment. And you'll be all surprised that I recommend Voyant to you. It's free, it's open, you can install it on your own machine, you can set up your own server. If you want to go the next step and publish your electronic texts to be available to others, then you need to get access to some form of server. And you don't particularly need fancy software on the server. I mean, you can just sort of make them available. We have the capacity in Voyant and Spidal we can host your texts, and you can in effect have a page where people can get access to them right there. But there's all sorts of people. In fact, you should be You should be generous. If you've done these electronic texts, you should give them to all sorts of people. There's a great project around maintenance and sustainability called Locks. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. University of Alberta has a digital repository. Deposit stuff. I'm sure you can find digital repositories all over the world, and just deposit it so that even if you lose interest completely, the stuff is there and somebody can use it. So there you are. It's uh And I like somebody's got the physical gadgets. Yeah, you need some laptops. You need a room. You need stable electricity. I don't know if the server has to be in the lab. I would join up with some people. Managing servers takes real skill, and there's nothing more annoying than servers that go down in the middle of the night. So wherever possible, work with a university computing service if you can. So that was one part of the question. Augustine, can you remind me of the other part of the?
Yes, another person, you have answered that's Joseph's question has been answered. Onwabwene question, Emily, is how do I find the right team who share the same vision? And then I think that also aligns with another question that comes in from Matthew Obijeku, which is, Professor, thank you for your presentation. What is DH all about?
Yeah. So I think on Monday we're going to have another 4-hour lecture on what DH is all about. But I'm going to start with the right team. So the right team is a people issue, and I'm willing to bet that some of you are better with people than I am. So I am not necessarily the best person. I can tell you that some of the approaches I have taken, and they haven't always worked. But the first approach is I am willing to trust anyone. If somebody says they want to be part of the team and want to do something, I'll go for it. We'll work out something they want to do. And sometimes they have different priorities and they leave and go to a different university, and that's just the way it goes. Secondly, I try to never exploit students. I try. I mean, I'm sure I do. So I try to, where possible, get funding or some sort of support. So they're not working for free. They could be getting credit for a course, a reading course or something like that. But I don't think it's a good idea to depend on free labor. One type of way of supporting people is credit. That's what you do with colleagues. When you and a colleague agree to write a paper together, you're not paying them, they're not paying you, but you're agreeing to share credit, which leads to something that's very important. At the beginning of project, when everybody is happy with each other, you should put together some form of charter, even if that charter is just a napkin. Just actually take the time to explicitly discuss what do you expect to get out of it? How will this project end? How does somebody get out of the project if they're tired with it? What's going to happen when people let down the side, when they don't finish something or something like that? Who's going to get credit? So actually sit down and talk about that. And if you give me a moment, there's a good paper, and I can send a PDF if you don't have access to it, written by my old colleague Stan Rucker on charters, on project charters. Um, he wrote it with Milena Radziskowska. So it's useful. It's useful. It's always useful in a team of people to regularly, and I'm not very good at this, but to regularly have conversations about how the project is going. One thing I am a great believer on, and poor Augustine knows this, is one of the ways I try to keep projects on track is to have regular meetings. I find I've tried all sorts of fancy project collaboration software, and I don't know. Sometimes it takes more time to figure out Trello and use it than to just meet once a week. If you meet once a week, you use something like Google Docs to create sort of, meeting notes. Nothing fancy, just sort of Augustine said he would do this. And then next week I can ask Augustine. Speaking of which, Augustine, have you done this or that? So uh, and all the rest in some ways is you guys know people all of us know people that this isn't a technology. This is what life is about, is enjoying people and doing stuff with people. And sometimes people leave or aren't interested or are upset, and you should always be forgiving, always listen to them, and always let people go. That's my 2 cents. But um, it can be other people have different approaches. I know colleagues that are much more regimented, or colleagues that are much more open. And then we also have to recognize, I'm sorry, I'm wandering on this. We have to recognize the politics. There is a major difference between a professor and a student. You have power as a professor. Students don't have power. Staff don't have as much power. So you need to recognize the power you have and be graceful in your use of it. Thank people, celebrate people, support your supporters. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I think the last question, you have said you're going to take a lecture, 4 hours lecture on that or something like that.
Oh,
The
right.
question then, what is digital humanities like?
Okay. So, I'm just going to give a short answer.
Yeah.
So, there are three things. It can be the use of computing in traditional humanities questions. So, a traditional humanities uh, research practice is to interpret a text. Can computers help us interpret a text? Well, in order to try that, we have to get an electronic copy of the text, and then we need tools that can maybe show the text to us in different ways, or maybe not. Maybe it's just easier to just read it and think about it. So that's one use. It's there are situations, and I started last Wednesday with concordances. Concordances go back to the 13th century, long before computers. People were building concordances as a useful way. I mean, even books are a technology. Indexes, tables of contents, these are all technologies, and computing is just in a. So that's one definition. The second definition would be the reverse of that, which is a humanities perspective on computing issues. And right now, artificial intelligence is taking off. They need our perspective on the ethics and the politics and the sociology of computing. We do not want to leave artificial intelligence to the engineers. We have stuff to offer our perspectives onto that. So it's from computing to humanities, from the humanities to computing, and then somewhere between the two, you all of a sudden get, it's dialectically, you get something which is better than either of those two. You get innovations. You begin to ask new questions with the computer that you couldn't ask. And the main example of that is scale. Nobody can read a million books, but with computers, we can study a million books. We can study all of 19th century American literature. Nobody could ever read that. We can study, everything written in a certain language. We can study stuff at scale with computers and ask questions that we could never ask as humanists before. I'll stop there. I think it's time for
Yes. So thank you very much. If you have question for Prof, you can keep it to the last. So now at this point, let's give a round of applause virtually or in person for Professor Rockwell for this wonderful lecture. And